Says he's deeply concerned about Friday's closure of Heathrow Airport. LBC's been exclusively told its chief executive Thomas Waldby will face questions from MPs next week. Well, meanwhile, a group representing 90 airlines at the airport says there could be legal action unless an amicable settlement is reached with Heathrow over Friday's closure. Nigel Wickings from the Heathrow Airline Operators Committee.
If we don't get good enough recourse and repayment in terms of the costs, then yes, there may be a case for legal action.
The Chancellor says she doesn't recognise reports the government's considering rolling back on free school meals in England. It's understood ministers could make them means tested for children in reception and years 1 and 2. The US President Donald Trump says he's discussing the possibility that American firms could own Ukrainian power plants to stop further Russian aggression. The US and Russia have been holding talks today on ending the war in Ukraine. And 365 jobs are at risk at Morrison's over plans to close some of its cafes, convenience stores and meat and fish counters. The supermarket says it needs to mitigate significant cost increases. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 8 points at 86.38. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.19. LBC weather: rain easing in Scotland and Northern Ireland tonight. Some showers for Northern England and Wales and a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Very good evening. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8 here on LBC. Joining me on the panel, sitting next to me, Stella Creasy, Labour MP for Walthamstow. Next to her is Graham Stuart, Conservative MP for Beverley and Holderness, former Energy Security Minister. To my right, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, and next to her, Theo Bertram, making his debut on the programme, Director of the Social Market Foundation think tank. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp on the same number. You can text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player. And don't forget, if you miss an episode of Cross Question, there is always the Cross Question podcast to catch up on every evening.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question. It's from Gareth in Wilmslow. It's a text question. Given the depth of ill will towards the Tories at the last election, have Labour unnecessarily backed themselves into a corner with their tax commitment, and will they pay the price at the next election? Stella Creasy.
Look, the next election is the next election. I am one of the few people who at the time was saying, can we prioritise public service investment? But we are where we are now. I think the question is what's going to happen in the spring statement, which I'm sure you'll want to talk about because we're expecting that this week, and where both can we be good stewards of the public money and also raise money in the right way. I'm a big fan of the list that Dan Needle has come up with of ways that you could actually raise quite a bit of money through small changes to the tax system. And I think it's probably now the time to look at that.
Like what?
So there is a thing about creating envelopes when you buy properties that you put them in to avoid stamp duty, which if you changed, you could raise £1 billion, for example.
That's gone straight over my head. I've got a clue what that means.
People buy a property, they put it into an envelope company, they then buy on from the envelope company does not attract stamp duty.
If you say so. Graham Stuart.
Well, I mean, they promised not to put up people's taxes and their taxes are going up. They said that their number one mission was economic growth. I fully applaud that. It doesn't matter what your priorities are, defence or the elderly or education or poverty alleviation, you need a strong economy. And they brought that to a staggering halt. And it's important to remember that what do they inherit? Not the basket case they try and suggest, but the fastest growing economy in the G7.
So
inflation back at 2% on target and 4 million more people in work than before. So unfortunately, Labour made promises which needed economic growth, and by bringing in their budget of broken promises and the national insurance contributions rise in particular, they have brought economic growth, job creation to a shuddering halt, and that is causing the difficulty. And now they're casting around both inventively for ways of raising tax, such as Stella has just suggested now, and in other ways they're making cuts. Things like personal independence payments, which is worth remembering, are not They talk about getting people into work, but that's actually about supporting people with disability.
But do you detect
a mess that they've created for themselves?
They
didn't inherit a black hole, but they have created
do you
one.
detect that there is any sign that Rachel Reeves on Wednesday, I don't know who's squeaking here, but
Me, my fault.
Do you detect any sign that Rachel Reeves might change course in a minor way on Wednesday? I mean, nobody expects her to do some sort of massive mea culpa U-turn.
Well, I mean, she's boxed herself into such a corner, as was said at the budget, that there was such a small amount of headroom that if anything went against her, that she was going to have a problem. Well, everything's gone against her because her budget helped stop economic growth. So I have no idea what's coming this week, but it needs to be pretty radical, because otherwise, not only are they looking at electoral oblivion, albeit many years away, with the vast majority they have, but they're also, more importantly, they're going to visit several years of low growth, increased unemployment, and lost opportunities for ordinary people. The very people that you'd hope that a Labour government would serve, they're actually betraying.
I mean, I'm not sure which political movement you belong to, Graham, but everything you just said about economic stability, economic stewardship came from your government. None of us here are going to forget Liz Truss anytime soon. So there was a challenge to deal with. What I'm talking about is what can we do now? Because you're right, things have changed as well. It's fair to say that we now face a level of economic uncertainty that has impacted on economic planning. But make no mistake, we are clearing up messes that you have created, and you do have to take responsibility for having put Liz Truss even into power for those 44 short days, because the damage that she did, that we've had to grow back from, underpinned by all the cuts to public services that you had made, that means this is turning around a very dire situation. What I'm talking about now is what can we do, given that we are in this position where, yes, we haven't seen the level of growth that we want to yet. I'm also here as chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, so I'm also going to be banging the drum that part of this is about the relationship we can build with Europe. But I'm not going to take any lectures from you, Graham, less than a year out of office, given what you did in 14 years and the
As I say, it was the fastest growing economy. Inflation was on target, and there were 4 million more people in work, and borrowing costs now.
Did you talk to people with their mortgages, Graham?
This is not just the Stella and Graham show. We do have two other panellists, but somebody was complaining that I wasn't challenging Graham Stuart. I didn't, because I knew I wouldn't have to, because Stella's so much better at it than I am. Theo Bertram.
So I think they've both got elements of truth to it. And if you go back to your questioner's question, which was, did she box herself in? Well, yes, she did. Are they going to lose the next election? Well, I think the difficult thing is people still haven't forgiven the Conservatives at all, and there's still a long way to go. So I think it's too early to say Labour have lost the next election. I think the problem with having said there won't be any income taxes is the economy has worsened so much that she's going to have to find money from somewhere. We have some ideas, inventive ideas, as Graham puts it, about where you could find that without breaking her rules. Whether they do that, I'm not sure. But I think there are things you could do, for example, raising taxes on online casinos, raising taxes on second homes, on empty homes, on homes that are flipped. You can raise about 20 billion just from those four policies. So there is still room in the tax system, but it's very small.
Natasha.
Well, obviously the question of has Rachel Reeves boxed herself in? Of course she has. The tax take is, her commitment from the last election not to raise VAT, income tax, national insurance is something like 70% of the tax take, 80% of the tax take. That's a huge part that she just can't touch. These fiscal rules, of course, at the time, they were obviously created to win back Labour support from people who didn't trust Labour on the economy. Arguably, it worked incredibly well. But now these fiscal rules Rachel Reeves is going to say on Wednesday that we're in a different situation, we're in a new world, the world has changed. Will she use that she's already tweeted them once, will she rip them up? I think previously the argument from the Treasury had been absolutely not, and they were, horrified at the even suggestion. Germany has looked at doing so. Other countries around the world looked at doing so. Ed Balls, I believe, the former Chancellor, even suggested this on his podcast a couple of weeks ago, that that's exactly what they should do under the pretence of defence spending. The world's changed. Russia, Ukraine, Donald Trump means we need to think again. Potentially, I think all of those options are definitely on the table for the Chancellor, but so far everything we're hearing about this budget is that it's going to be a lot smaller. Sorry, it's not even a budget. It's not a budget. It's a spring statement. It's going to be a lot smaller.
It's definitely not an emergency budget.
It's not, as the Conservatives would like to think it is. But on your point about the £22 billion black hole, of course, if that existed, That has now been dealt with, according to Rachel Reeves, in the last budget. This deal that we're now dealing with now, this around 20 billion, we're told, that the Chancellor has to find, that is her own issue, right? Because she's now been in power for 8 months. The economy might have got worse, inflation might have got worse, borrowing might have got worse. That is now, I think, on her shoulders. And I think to keep on blaming the last government, of course you can say, look, only 8 months in power, of course you can't solve every problem overnight. But I think this whole is now her own doing.
Who is this lady, says Marita? It's Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, unless you mean Stella Creasy, who is also a lady. From Labour,
I'm a lady.
Labour MP for Walthamstow. Right, a follow-up question from Martin in Doncaster. Hi, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, the question is are Labour to blame for the UK dropping 3 places to 23rd in the world for being the happiest?
We're the 23rd most happy country in the world, which when you think there are 200 countries, I suppose that's not too
bad at all, actually, isn't it?
But we have been gradually slipping down, I think, over the last few years. I don't know how they calculate a happiness index, but somebody has to do it, I suppose. Theo?
Well, I saw the Nordic countries were at the top. I'm not sure what it is that the Nordic countries do. They certainly haven't got the weather. But they
Dime bars. They've got dime
drink
bars.
more
Really
alcohol.
lovely pastry.
Dime
I don't know if
bars.
that's the answer.
Dime bars, you get them in IKEA. Dime bars, they're the most amazing chocolate ever. It's like
IKEA.
chocolate
Oh,
caramel.
really?
Yeah.
ABBA, they've got lots going.
But, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that the UK has fallen down the rankings. I think we've had a tough, long period of time in the country of stagnant economy. And I think people are fed up with it and still fed up with it even now. So that wouldn't surprise me that we've slipped down. I don't know what the answers are to making everyone happy.
Natasha, you're a very happy person.
I'm definitely a glass half full person.
You are?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Are Labour to blame? No. One word answer. No, I don't think that's the case. At the same way that you can, I think the country, I think lots of frustrations with the country have been going on for a lot longer than the last 8 months. The economy, jobs, the feeling that nothing works in this country, those are some very, very deep set issues, and they have been the case for a long, long time. It's just nothing. I don't think it's anything to do. And I haven't seen this study. But yes, I think 23rd's not too bad. My glass half full. I think it's.
I want to know
okay.
where France is in it. Corey, where's France in it? Stella?
I don't think it's Labour. I do think it's politicians, because I tend to think politicians are to blame for most things, in that we've created
She says
a
that as
politics.
if she isn't one.
No, I am one. I take my responsibility, because I think our politics has become too focused on finding someone to blame for why life is rubbish, rather than actually it's possible to change things, and how do you make that happen? And I would say that across Graham is nodding. See, with pieces broken out, the honest truth is our politics over the last 15 years, I've been MP for 15 years now, has gotten smaller rather than bigger, but the challenges we face have gotten more erratic and more frequent. So if you'd have said to me in 2010, when you get elected, you'll be dealing with Scottish referendum, Brexit, pandemic, Putin, Israel, Gaza, I wouldn't have believed you about just the level of things, with underlying challenges like housing and long-term poverty and immigration flows. Because our politics have become increasingly Yabu sucks, and I'm sure we'd all at points recognise that, we don't look like we're meeting the challenge. So I can understand where the public can look at us and go, actually, the people we asked to help us figure out what to do about all of this, they feel a bit wanting.
But we are, actually, it turns out, as you say, if that is accurate, 23rd in the world, we're a pretty happy country.
Graham isn't worried about that. He quite likes fighting
we are. I think this
But
is
we're
the
supposed to be the
greatest-
sixth
this is
richest, so therefore we ought to be up from 23.
Rich doesn't equal happy, though, does it?
Wealth does not equal happiness, but in terms of answering the question, though, we've moved 3 places down. Does Labour coming in with a whole load of promises which they haven't kept, does them talking down the economy with ruinous effects on the real world economy, does their assault on the most improved education system in England that you've seen in such a long time, do all these things add up to make people a bit more miserable? I think they probably deserve to take credit for 3 places down. But let's keep the country in perspective. If we're 23rd, once we get Conservative government again in 2029, we can rapidly move up and get ourselves in the top 10 again. Not only in terms of our economic performance, but happiness even more important.
Ellie wonders why I'm not blaming Meghan Markle for unhappiness in this country. And Ellie wishes to make clear that she was referring to what she called Michael's the shouty one rather than Natasha in her question, which I'm afraid I think is probably...
guilty as charged, I'm sure. All I'm trying to offer is some sense that actually in politics we are thinking about maybe we do need to do better at showing people it is possible to make change happen, because it is easy to throw mud around it. It's easy to find someone to blame. But actually, for all the people who've got too much month at the end of their money, they do want a better prospect. And that's what most of us, I think, came into politics. See, Graham, I'm trying to be generous to you.
Yeah.
Like, we all came into politics for a reason.
Generous to me, Stella.
I know.
Well, on that note, I think we should go to a break. Quick while we're ahead. It's 8:15.
LBC.
She's
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
16 minutes past 8 on LBC. Graham Stuart is here, Conservative MP for Beverley and Holderness. Stella Creasy, Liberal, Labour MP. I do apologise for that gross
really unpleasant this evening,
Labour MP for Walthamstow.
Absolutely no mark on you.
Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, and Theo Bertram, director of the Social Market Foundation think tank, which has been going since, the early 1990s, wasn't it?
89.
89. Because I remember David Willits was a predecessor of yours, wasn't he? And then he chaired the organisation.
Yeah.
What does it do?
Well, the Social Market Foundation started back in the sort of 80s when you had Kinnock sort of viewing the state as the answer to everything and Thatcher viewing privatisation and the markets as the answer to everything. And the Social Market Foundation had a radical idea at that time, which was maybe the state had a role to play in the markets and maybe the markets had a role to play in delivery of public services. That's no longer radical. That's now the entire centre ground of British politics. But that's where we started and that's what we're still doing today.
Right. RB says, I love Stella Creasy and she can shout as loudly as she likes. She's one of the best and always smiles.
Did you just text that in?
Just so you know, that not everyone's against you, Stella. Right. Michael in Rains Park says, can Rachel Reeves really be accused of introducing austerity measures when the national debt is almost 3 trillion and the annual deficit is 60 billion? Theo?
So I think austerity has a lot of stigma attached to it because it was George Osborne, David Cameron's word. I think when you look back at what was happening in 2010, things were bad. Some of those things were caused by global financial problems. I know each of the parties want to say all of the financial problems are caused by the other party, but when they're out of office, they probably concede that actually it's the global financial problems. But austerity then, compared to now, since 2010, we've had COVID, we've had the Ukraine war, and now we've got Trump tariffs. However bad it was for us in 2010, unfortunately, things are a lot worse now regardless of what government was in power. So I think Rachel Reeves has to make cuts in this thing that's not a budget.
Let alone an emergency.
But I don't think she's doing them through choice. And I think there probably was an element of choice and ideology in 2010 in a way that there isn't now.
But they are being done through choice because everything a government does is through choice. People accuse...
The choice is less, though, after Liz Truss. I do think that's fair to say.
If you want to raise 500 million or cut expenditure by 500 million, you don't have to cut a winter fuel allowance. You could put 2 pence on fuel duty, for example, or whatever.
I agree.
There are always alternatives. And yet consistently, they seem to have chosen measures which is actually going to hurt the very people that you wouldn't think a Labour government would hurt.
Well, I think the thing that we're arguing about is whether or not they need to make cuts full stop. And I think that they are forced to do that. Where should they make those cuts? I think we can have another argument about where those should be and where the fairest place for those is. I actually think the winter fuel payment, and I think most politicians would agree with this privately, even if they never dare to say it live on the radio, is actually a good thing to means test the winter fuel payment. But this makes no sense for us to be giving money to Tony Blair or Richard Branson at a time when we don't have enough money in the country. So I think means testing the winter fuel payment was the right thing to do. Have we drawn the line in the right place? Maybe not. But I do think we're in a position...
It's not a maybe, Theo, is it? I mean, people on 13,000 are not exactly wealthy. No one would have had a problem with saying, cutting it off, I don't know, pick a number between 20,000, 25,000 perhaps, a long way from Branson and Tony Blair.
They
brought it so low that people who are barely able to make ends meet have lost it. And that's the point.
I agree that it could be in a higher place. But so what is the Conservative commitment on where it should be?
I'm not a front bench spokesman for the Conservatives, but as I'm not speaking for the party, say 20, 25,000, that would be the sort of area to be talking about and looking at. But as you say, when you go through it, actually for the political pain, you're visiting pain on pensioners. The number of Bransons and Blairs in this world are few and far between.
Yeah, and
they have more political importance than
Natasha.
They do material financial one.
Well, one criticism of the government last week was on the welfare measures that were brought in by Liz Kendall, that, even George Osborne didn't touch the PIP disability benefit. The argument from the government was, well, actually, PIP is clearly letting in more people claim it than ever before. So, has something changed? Do we have a mental health epidemic in this country, which means that more people are needing that benefit? Or is it that, the system's got somehow more lenient, more people are making decisions quicker, or therefore they're making mistakes? Is there a problem here? One of the, like I say, the critics of that was, even George Osborne didn't go so far. And, in terms of the level of cuts that we're looking at, they are not the same, are they? And of course, you're right, government is about choices, and it's about very, very tough choices. And this government have clearly had to realise incredibly quickly how difficult some of those choices, when you do not have the money to play with, are. The last Labour government came in, they had a booming economy and lots of money to play with, and this government just do not. I think, however, for Rachel Reeves, what is really confusing is going from one budget where you were raising taxes and increasing the investment in the NHS, long-term sort of solutions, Great British Energy, and now 6 months, 8 months later, we're looking at cuts, we're looking at squeezes. I don't know how the British public are going to go with that rhetoric, and I think it's a confusing message. I don't think the public are quite seeing where the priorities are for this government and exactly where they're going.
Stella?
I've been clear, I'm not a fan of the welfare proposals that have been forward at the moment, partly because I think we have to learn the lesson of George Osborne on austerity, because the thing about austerity is actually ended up being quite expensive. Things like the bedroom tax actually cost us more than it saved. One of the things I'm very concerned about is only 23% of employers have actually made adaptations for somebody who's disabled to work for them. Disabled people make 60% more job applications than non-disabled people. There is stuff in the consultation about how do we change the workplace so that actually it's possible for people who do have a disability to find work, but it's quite vague. And one of the things I'd like us to learn from and to use, so they have freed up £1 billion to invest in this. What they've not said is what they're going to spend on it. But for me, in the last economic crisis, the Future Jobs Fund was a great model of actually supporting people, long-term people, into work that paid for itself. In the work that I'm doing in the party and in the conversations I'm having, that's the model I'd like us to move to for disabled people. It's the same with the NHS. We know there were millions of people left on NHS waiting lists who couldn't work because the previous government left them on an NHS waiting list. They need treatment, but then we need to see what kind of work they can do. That in itself is a double hit in terms of saving money. So for me, there's a question here about, do we learn the lessons of austerity of where actually you can invest and you can save, or do we end up being priced out by the number first and then the policy second? That's why I've been very clear. I can't support what's being put on the table at the moment, but also the kind of arguments that a lot of us are making about actually, hang on, where are the savings to be made that also are a win-win? Because the reality is we're asking disabled people to take on a workplace that's still pretty hostile to them. If we change that, we can unlock all the things they can do and we can save money at the same time.
So you will vote against these measures?
I have no idea what's going to be put forward, but at the moment, I don't support what's being put. No, the PIP stuff doesn't make any sense to me because there's all sorts of reasons about where people get 3 points or 2 points. And as MPs, we see these cases all the time. There's lots of good things, like not reassessing people. I've got someone who's got progressive dementia in my community. That isn't going to get any better. Reassessing them is a waste of money and it's deeply offensive to them and denies them a dignity. So there is good stuff in there. I think it's one of those areas where now we need to be able, as a Labour movement, to input into it. And as I say, what a lot of us are saying is, well, hang on, we had a really good model with the Future Jobs Fund. It tackled long-term youth unemployment. It used a subsidy model, but actually 50% of those people who went through that scheme went on to find work and stay in work. So it paid for itself. Can we not do something like this now?
Right. Next question comes from our old friend Sean in Concert. Hello, Sean.
I don't know how to control myself, mate. I use MPs on a different planet, right? You're going to get another pay rise when people are going to be struggling on Wednesday. Yous are an absolute joke.
So what's your question, Sean?
Why are you getting a pay rise?
Can I answer that?
Go on.
I have no idea, Sean, because it's not our decision and it's not something we even get a vote on. For what it's worth, I've always used the money that I get to subsidise my office so that I have more members of staff to be able to support my local community, because we don't get enough money to pay our staff properly to be able to help the people with all the casework. But fundamentally, MPs don't set their pay, so we are stuck. I think most of us would agree with you. Right now, it's really hard to justify, but we have no control over this. And I just wish that the parliamentary authority that does would be more open about saying that.
And I'm very clear on this show, whenever people ring up about MPs' pay, I do point that out. And we should also point out the facts here, that inflation is now 3%, the MPs' pay rise is 2.8%, and it'll start from the start of next month, and that will take their annual pay to £94,000 a year, which of course is way above the average wage. But wouldn't you expect MPs to earn way above the average wage? Theo, this is a subject that comes up every year, and people are convinced that it's MPs that vote themselves a pay rise, and we know it's not. But there is certain parts of the media that do feed this narrative, and I think it's completely irresponsible.
I think MPs actually have a difficult job to do. They have to live in two places, most of them. Their family are in one place and their work is in another. And they come on shows like this and get shouted at all the time, and they do a lot of difficult things in their communities. And most of them came into politics not to come on shows like this and become famous or become powerful, but because they believe in changing the world to be a better place. That's my view of most of the politicians I've ever met. And maybe spending a long time in the Commons changes that over time, but genuinely I think that they are there for good reasons. Their equivalents in almost every other country in the Western world are paid an awful lot more. And in the US, it's an enormous amount more. It's a completely different order. And not only that, their offices are much better funded. The thing about British politics, it's an amateur sport compared to US politics. You know, when you go to an MP's office, and we've seen this also in the defences they have when they get attacked, is that they're just staffed by a couple of people at most, people who are on very low wages, giving up their time to support those MPs. The reason why they're on very low wages is because we don't give enough to our MPs to pay those staff. So I think not only do we need to make sure that we pay MPs properly, but we need to make sure their staff are paid properly too.
Well, compared to when I worked in Parliament in the mid-1980s, I mean, they're getting a huge amount. I remember the staff allowance then was £12,000 a year, and I was earning £6,000 a year and working all the hours God sent for that. And people say, well, yeah, but it's 1980s, but 6,000 even in 1985 wasn't very much. Natasha?
I think I sort of want to turn the question around, Sean, and have a conversation about whether we feel that we've got enough of the high quality, apart from the panel, of course, who are obviously of a high
Not
caliber,
representative,
of
obviously.
course. But I do, I do agree with basically a lot of what you said, Theo. I do agree that most of the politicians that I talk to and I come across day in, day out doing the job that I do, they are in the politics for the right reasons and they do want to make a difference. I don't think most politicians don't go in to become Prime Minister, to go into the cabinet, to be powerful or whatever it might be. I think most of them do go in to try and enact change. But I do look around the sort of quality of MPs that we have, and I do feel that quality has declined over the time that I've been covering British politics, I'm afraid to say. And I wonder if that is pay related or not. And maybe there is something about other professions that maybe do attract that. We should have really high quality politicians in our Commons, in the House of Lords. These people are making our laws and running the country, and absolutely we should be holding them to a very, very high standard. I think that they should be paid accordingly.
Graham?
Well, as Stella has said, it's set by an independent body, rightly or wrongly. That was done years ago because this is such a hot potato and the newspapers and Sean from Concert would come in and go. So it was given to somebody else, and they basically link it to the average rise in salaries across the public sector, and then they sometimes just take a little off. So fundamentally, so MPs are not getting some massive thing. They're basically getting the same rise as the average across
but
the whole
to
public sector.
most people would say £94,000 a year is a massive salary.
Yeah, well, most people, people on £94,000 a year regard anyone who earns double what they do as being grossly excessively overpaid and probably unjustifiable no matter what it is. That's what human beings are like. So, but as you say, when you compare it to a deputy head teacher of a large secondary school or a local solicitor or someone in business. I mean, I ran a small business with 40-odd people. I was earning more money in cash terms 30 years ago, cash terms, than I do today. And so, whatever you might say, coming in for
we
themselves,
appreciate the sacrifice you've made.
I shouldn't even have mentioned that, should I? Because it'll just wind Sean and others up even more. But that's the reality.
Yeah, and others will say, politics is about service, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that you shouldn't need, we make the same argument with charity bosses as well, right? That they earn quite a lot.
Shall we find out if Sean is convinced by your respective arguments?
I think I know the answer.
Sean, the last word is yours.
I think you should go up into space in a rocket, like. You just want to be ashamed of yourselves. Absolutely ashamed of yourselves.
Thank you, Sean.
I was expecting something much more volcanic than that, but there we go. Sean, thank you very much indeed. We'll take more of your questions in just a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:32 news time with Daryl Jackson.
The Prime Minister says he's deeply concerned about Friday's closure of Heathrow Airport. LBC's been exclusively told its Chief Executive Thomas Waldby will face questions from MPs next week. The Chancellor's played down any suggestion the government is considering introducing means testing for some free school meals in England. Reports claim ministers are considering rolling back some of them for children in reception and years 1 and 2. And Donald Trump's told a meeting of his cabinet that American firms could own Ukrainian power plants as a way to protect them from Russian attacks. Meanwhile, talks have taken place between US and Kremlin officials over restarting commercial shipping in the Black Sea. LBC weather, rain easing in Scotland and Northern Ireland tonight. Some showers for northern England and Wales and a low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC.
Your
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34 on LBC. Graham Stuart, Conservative MP, is here. Stella Creasy, Labour MP. Theo Bertram, Director of the Social Market Foundation, and LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark. Right, a WhatsApp question from Nikki in Kent. JD Vance says that Trump is ready to invade Greenland. Well, to be accurate, he said annex. Slightly different, but same effect. Are we just going to stand by, supine as usual, because we want a trade deal with the USA and we can't do anything to annoy Trump? Well, just as a bit of background to this, in an interview last month, which has resurfaced online, JD Vance said that Trump will seize Greenland from Denmark if necessary, quotes, because he doesn't care about what the Europeans scream at us. He cares about putting the interests of American citizens first. Vance's wife, Usha, is now visiting Greenland this week, while the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, is making a separate trip to the territory also this week. Not sure I'd want to be in their shoes. Natasha, let's start with you on this. Are we so desperate for a trade deal that we will just accept anything?
I don't think that we are. And it's interesting because Rachel Reeves said yesterday in an interview, she basically admitted that the digital services tax, which is a tax that comes over digital services that have some form of headquarters or business in the UK should have to pay it. She basically admitted that is on the table as part of negotiations with the US about the upcoming tariffs that Donald Trump's government are expected to input on the UK and other governments around the world, which is quite remarkable, really, and something that I didn't think exactly.
That's what you do in trade agreements, isn't it? You negotiate.
Well, of course, on one side, actually, I do agree with her that actually putting it on the table, if it stops you from getting 20% tariffs slapped on all of our goods thanks to Donald Trump's decision, then actually I totally agree with it. But actually, when you step back and think about it, the idea that the government is putting up a policy that we've just brought in quite recently, I believe, on the table, it does lead to the question: what else are we prepared to give up, on the table? And Peter Kyle, I know, doesn't want to put the Online Safety Act up for discussion, for example, right? But is that something that tech billionaires in Donald Trump's administration, like Elon Musk, might like to start to negotiate with? And all of the criticism of parties like we've not got a representative here, but for the Reform Party, say the NHS will be up for sale under a Reform government, and it does beg the question of what else could be. There's a sort of slippery slope to what could be. But of course, you'd expect our Chancellor, our government, to be fighting to stop those tariffs from going on, wouldn't you?
You would. Stella.
I said earlier, look, I'm the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. I'm supremely concerned that if you try to ride both horses, you can get knocked off both of them. Of course, we want a strong relationship with America. They are still our ally. And of course, we also need to have a strong relationship with Europe because you can fight many things, but you can't fight geography. I think there is a challenge here because I think the Trump administration respects strength and they see Europe as a strong competitor. So one of the things that's happening at the moment is some sort of literal horse trading about who is in charge and who is setting the deal here. Do I think that ultimately we've got to press ahead with the summit in May? Do I think ultimately what's going to happen is a reset with Europe before we get to a point with America? Yes, because I think it's clearer where that's going and what opportunities that offers for us. Whereas with this at the moment, it is quite uncertain. But do I take it very seriously? Yeah, because I think right now Vance is probably odds on to be the replacement to Trump at the end of his administration as well. So we need to take seriously what this man is doing. And frankly, I think he's quite provocative as well. I mean, if you saw that, he was the one challenging Keir when Keir went to Washington. He was the one who first started challenging Zelensky, and he's the one who's now putting this forward. So I think we have to be very cool about actually where does the British interest lie. The British interest ultimately lies in being part of a strong trading partnership and then having a strong trading relationship with America. I think it is possible, but I think it is quite uncertain what they offer.
But if America did invade Greenland, which I can't quite bring myself to think that that's even possible,
before or after Canada?
Well, I think they'd have to go over Canada to get there, wouldn't they? It would. I mean, we couldn't fail to condemn it, could we? Otherwise, you've got to have some consistency.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is hyperbole. I do think what matters now is what's going to happen to those tariffs. What does it mean for the wider trading environment? Because we're already experiencing the instability that the talk of tariffs has created. I think it is unrealistic to think that somehow we could stand between the two. I do think we need to have a strong relationship with Europe. That's why I think that summit in May really matters. It really matters to be clear about what trade we want to do with both sides, but it also really matters as to why we do it. So, I mean, look, people are going to get excited about all this stuff. What matters is the deal.
Graham?
But we have to plan for these extremes, don't we? I mean, the thing is, it's quite hard to stretch your mind to conceive that the United States of America, that bastion of Western values and democracy and respect for the rule of law, the architect, the primary architect, if you like, of the global system of rules that has protected the small from the large, the weak from the strong, that they would countenance invading that, talk the way they do about Canada. So you hope that it is hyperbole, but we have to look at the extremes. I mean,
didn't you say Trump was a Russian agent?
I didn't say he was a Russian agent. I said we had to consider the possibility that he might be a Russian asset and that he had in some ways been compromised by Putin, because it's quite hard if he had been entirely compromised. And compromat is, after all, KGB officers, a KGB. I don't have the evidence one way or the other, but again, it's the same.
But the fact that you said it, I mean, I said that in the last hour, and as I was saying it, I'm thinking, oh my God,
You've watched too much Netflix.
Yeah, I'm sounding like one of these conspiracy theorists that I absolutely loathe. But you have to admit that there is that possibility,
and so it's trying to stretch. The reason I tweeted that, and it was controversial, but is that we do need to think about it. So what if he is? What does that mean for us, and how do we prepare? What if they do seek to annex Greenland, and even, if it's possible, Canada? I mean, it's quite hard to get your head round, but we have to plan for all eventualities, and we're also going to have to toughen up. And we've been very supportive of Keir, because recognising the need to maintain the relationship with the Americans while they don't get to quite that level. But we've also got a plan for the fact that if he crosses the line, as you say, going into Greenland or whatever would entirely remake our relationship.
Okay, so Theo.
There are lots of wild things that Trump says and thinks of. I actually think the Greenland thing is on the less wild end of the scale. There's a great book by a guy called Tim Marshall called Prisoners of Geography. It was written a few years ago, and one of the things it talks about is how global warming means that the questions of security in the world are changing. And one of those big questions is around the access through Greenland coming over the pole from China or from Russia. Suddenly, the US is much closer to those countries than it was before, because previously there was a massive pile of ice that no one could cross, and now that's melted. So when you look at Denmark, it really is not well defended. And even the Danes, when you look at Greenland, it's really not well defended. And even the Danes say that. I think the outcome of this is unlikely to be that the US invades Greenland. I think the outcome of this is much more likely to be a large stationing of US troops in Greenland.
Well, I wonder how that would come about, because Trump has completely alienated the Danish Prime Minister, who's not going to look favourably on any request. And this is where Trump's unique style of diplomacy doesn't really work, does it?
The art of the deal doesn't look so clever.
No, well, a caller in the last hour called it the art of the steal.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is very apposite when you think about Greenland, isn't it? Let's take a follow-up question from Ulf in Hamburg. Ulf, hello, what would you like to ask?
Good evening. What steps should the United Kingdom and Europe take in order to obtain or achieve military independence from the United States, both in terms of conventional weapons as well as nuclear weapons?
Big question, but brief answers if you can. Theo?
I think the US will remain our military ally, but I do think we need to be prepared alongside Europe to be able to fight some more of our own battles. So I think that means we have to spend much more on defence. I think that's one of the big challenges that Rachel Reeves will face this week, is if we spend more money on defence, we have less money for other things. But I think that's the position we're in across Europe.
Stella?
Look, I've already said the Defence and Security Cooperation deal needs to be on the table for May. I would also add into that international aid, because I think you need hard and soft power working together. And whatever you think of the proposed aid cuts, every country across Europe is talking about doing that. Europe is the world's third largest donor. If we're talking about, for example, some of the other threats that we might face and some of the other challenges, like China and the investment that they're making in countries, collaborating together with our European partners who are more consistent, shall we say, about their values, issues, both in terms of defence and in terms of aid, would probably be a wise thing to do. So we need to make sure that the summit in May has this on the agenda in the round.
Should it also have on the agenda this seemingly crazy idea that the EU is saying, we've got this 150 billion euro defence fund, but we're not going to spend any of that with British companies. I mean, surely this has to go
very simple.
above
That's because
these Brexit
that's because
questions.
we're not part of the single market, and I've just spent 3.5 hours.
But it's not simple, Stella. We spend a fortune with Thales, the French company, Leonardo, the Italian company. They're not part of our market, and we spend with them. For them to do that when we're the largest defence armaments business in Europe weakens Europe, and I hope that you, as the chairman of Labour for Europe, will be able to tell our friends in Germany and elsewhere that they are short-sighted, cutting off the nose to spite their face, and putting protectionism ahead of the interests of Europe and its security. And you should tell them that, and occasionally speak to your friends as firmly as you do to those you oppose.
I do. I was in Brussels last week, but do you regret the fact that the Tory Brexit took us out of any kind of foreign and defence cooperation at all, which is why we're in that position? It's absolutely why you want to have that conversation in May at the summit.
There is nothing to stop the European Defence Fund being spent with
there
UK
is, Graham,
firms.
and you have to take responsibility and accountability for that. We are trying to resolve that issue, but the reality is, because we're not part of the single market, we aren't part of that process. It makes sense, doesn't it? They're investing in their companies. That was what being part of the European Union did.
To exclude the largest defence industry in Europe.
No, they're not.
They are not forced to do so. There are no rules that exist unless you can quote them to us now, because I don't believe there are any.
It's literally part of it's because we're not. I mean, I can send you a primer on all of this and the challenges that we've got, but the reality is we have now to be creative about the defence architecture as a result of the foreign cooperation agreement that you guys signed. It is what it is. I want us to sort it out. That's what the summit in May gives us an opportunity to do, and I hope that we can have some kind of defence funding, because again,
countries in Europe buy from our armaments industry all the time, so the idea they can't is a nonsense.
No, it's not that they can't, Graham.
Exactly. They choose not to.
No, you're not listening to what Europe is doing. Europe is investing, but because we're not part of the European Union, we're not part of the investment plans. If you had signed a foreign cooperation agreement plan, we might be in a different place. We've got a summit in May to try and resolve it.
Ulf, there you go. Thank you very much for your question. We'll come to more questions in just a moment with our panel. It's 8:46.
The Spring Statement on LBC.
Labour promised change, but with Rachel Reeves potentially set to announce big cuts to policing, prisons and welfare, are we about to witness austerity 2.0?
This government is determined to reform the welfare system to ensure that work always pays.
And with an awful April of soaring bills about to hit households within days, what will the Chancellor's Spring Statement mean for your finances?
We need to spend more on defence, and if that means cuts to welfare, then so be it.
If my benefits are cut, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Join me, Sheila Fogarty, for the Spring Statement, the expert reaction and your views.
The money has to come from somewhere.
Stay with LBC this Wednesday for continuous coverage.
The Spring Statement on LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Right, we are with Graham Stuart, Theo Bertram, Stella Creasy and Natasha Clark. A text question from Billy in Ventnor, who says, do streaming companies need to be more responsible for what they're outputting? And could the government invest into them more to spread positive messaging? Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this series on Netflix, Adolescence, which I've watched half of at the moment, but we're going to be talking after 9 about whether there needs to be a minister for men and boys, because there's obviously a minister for women and girls, and the effect of social media and other streaming services on particularly young boys, I think, needs a lot more discussion. So let's bring that into this as well. Natasha, let's start with you.
Do streaming companies need to be more responsible for what they're outputting? I'm not quite sure in what way. I mean, I don't think they are obliged to spread more positive messaging. This Adolescence Netflix drama, which I saw last week, is incredibly powerful. It's not positive, but it's realistic, isn't it? It's telling it how it is. And the reality is there are a lot of young boys, young men that are being influenced by what they're seeing online. And I don't know if anybody read Fraser Nelson's piece in the Times or the Sunday Times at the weekend about men and boys, and one of the stats really shocked me. Apparently more 13-year-old boys have a smartphone than have a present father. And he was using that column to talk about how the government don't need to be not afraid to talk about families and talk about relationships more. And it's something that, traditionally, most politicians would never dare get involved in the family. Our matters for the family are matters that are not, traditionally something that politicians would get involved in. But I absolutely think that it's something that needs to be done. And, the way that families in this country are completely changing. And, is there something about that? It's a conversation I don't think we're having. And, streaming companies need to be more responsible for what they're out. And I don't know what the suggestion is. This is Billy's question suggesting that they're not responsible.
Theo, you used to work for TikTok, I believe. How seriously do companies like that take this? Because, you look at TikTok and the things that they promote to teenagers in China, shall we say, are very different to what the algorithms promote in the West.
Yeah, so I think it's a real range between the tech companies. And I would say at the moment, I think if you look at Twitter or X, you can see porn on there if you're 13. You can see Andrew Tate if you're 13. That's not the case on YouTube or on TikTok or on most other platforms. It does worry me that we talked about J.D. Vance earlier, but he came to the Munich Security Conference and lectured Europe on how it should have American freedom of speech values. I think we have freedom of speech values in this country, but I don't think it goes that far. And this comes back to this question of, should the UK stand up against the US? And I think on those things, we should stand up. For the things where actually we draw the line in a different place in this country. So I do think some of the tech companies take action on this, and I do think some of them don't.
Graham?
Well, I think, they are regulated, so I don't see the need enormously for more regulation. The last thing I want is the government telling people what programmes they should make. I've seen Adolescence, and I thought it was really good. But I'm not sure it tells it like it is, Natasha. After all, they've got this young killer from this particularly stable...
No spoilers, please. I've got 2 episodes to watch.
Particularly stable family and loving family. And as the Fraser Nelson analysis was talking about, the big connection between criminality and family situation links to whether or not you've got a father in the house or not, whether you've got family breakdown and the rest of it. So telling it like it is I thought it was brilliant drama, and Stephen Graham is just such a fantastic actor, and it was moving and important. And just because I think it doesn't tell the real story about problems like that in the country doesn't mean it should be interfered with by the likes of me. I think they should be free to make the programme as they see fit.
Stella?
I don't think it's an either or. We know that the algorithms do promote this, and as Theo says, you can see it on Twitter. I slightly take exception to what Natasha's saying, just because for several years now I've been banging on about dads and parental leave and making sure that actually we do support families. Feminists have been shouting and screaming about sexual assault in schools for decades now. The Everyone's Invited project just released a list of 1,600 primary schools where there is a rape culture in this. I think, Graham, the challenge is that it is all too real adolescence, as it's not unrealistic. And it's also that we as politicians probably don't fully understand quite how quickly things have changed, because I used to be a youth worker and we always used to say, everyone's been a 15-year-old, not everyone's been a 15-year-old today. So it's not an either or, but there is a need to change the debate about what we can do to support people to be there to have the conversations with their kids, because some people oppose the relationship and sex education campaigns that many of us have been running to have good conversations in schools that are not about putting boys down or putting girls down. It's about teaching them that the most powerful words are yes and no, and the value of consent and the value of being aware about abuse. We also do need to take on the companies. It's not an either or, but what this documentary, and it's great for those of us who've been trying to have this conversation for years, that it's got this kind of coverage.
It's not a documentary.
Well, it actually, frankly, almost feels like it for those of us who have been dealing with.
I don't think so, because
thousands
this
of young
child
girls in
concerned
this country who get sexually assaulted or worse in their schools.
I just go back, and I don't want to do this to death, but the child has had no engagement with the police, no criminal record, and the kind of children who get involved in these things don't come out of a clear blue sky.
What's your evidence?
I haven't got the data to hand, but
there isn't evidence. The reverse is the case. This is happening with millions of young people in our country. They are being exposed to porn in primary school, and we can either pretend it's not happening, or it's the bad kids.
Those who murder girls tend not to people who have no disciplinary bad problems at school, and they tend not to be people who haven't got into trouble already.
Right. So I want to squeeze in a final question. Let's squeeze in this one from James, who says, who's to blame for last week's crisis at Heathrow Airport? Is it their sleepy CEO, the National Grid, or Net Zero? Our Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, told LBC that she'd have found it hard to sleep in the Chief Executive's position. Think about that for a minute. The National Grid boss suggested that Heathrow had enough power to keep running. Richard Tice blames Net Zero for the airport not using a backup diesel generator. The Transport Secretary said he was peddling myths. Well, on the net zero point, Graham, is that to blame for the fire at Heathrow?
I don't know. And the CEO deciding to stay in bed. I mean, the one thing you do, you remember David Cameron being criticised when he was doing important things in Rwanda when he wasn't there for some floods in his constituency years ago. The first lesson, if you're in a leadership position, is go on the ground when there's a big problem. So he should have done that. As to, I hope we will get a full and public explanation of what went on, because we're told by National Grid that there was in fact sufficient power from other units, and that they had backup generators, so they hadn't got rid of all their diesel backup generators. So what it was exactly, but it's a clear wake-up call that that should not happen. Briefly, but I think net zero, despite Richard Tice would love it to be, and notwithstanding the fact that my leader has now said that we can't deliver it by 2050.
And I'm assuming that you disagree with that.
I was the first Conservative MP to call for net zero to be put into law, and I was the net zero minister and was driving forward the policies in order to deliver that.
Then you are a hero to zero.
Well, but I was also saying when I was in the department, we've got to get the economics right. If no one is going to, we're less than 1%. The critics are right to say we're less than 1% of overall global emissions, and the only way, the most influential way that we can help the planet, which is what the aim is for others to follow us. And if we have our electricity prices...
wrong.
Kemi's right. Kemi is right to say that we have to, because what we have to do is marry action on the climate with the economics and with global engagement with others to follow. Otherwise, there is absolutely no point. If we impoverish ourselves, no one will follow us.
We're running out of time, so very brief answers from everyone else, please. Stella.
There's going to be an inquiry. I don't think this is to do with net zero. I do think we need to be clear about national resilience, and national resilience is also about our public transport infrastructure, and it is a very serious matter.
Natasha?
Yeah, what Stella said, we need to have better backups, and NESO and National Grid will look into exactly what happened. I think the case was, didn't National Grid say there was enough backup power, but it wouldn't have kept the airport open completely all day, so they decided to make the decision to close it, or some partial explanation
Which is a bit like closing schools before there's even a snowflake.
Not Not really. They lost. There was a fire burning at the generator for basically half the night, so it did knock
that wasn't
2 out of 3 of them out.
Anyway,
I
Theo.
shouldn't have gone to bed though.
I think going to bed was the right thing to do.
Controversial.
So I've seen people do crisis management, and you get this machismo of, I'm going to stay up all night, I'm going to answer every question.
Just like us on election night.
So
exactly.
They're prepared for this scenario, and the idea was that the CCO would take over, and then the CEO would sleep. Now, the reason why they were doing it that way round is because the risky thing to do is not to close an airport. Closing an airport means no risk. Everyone is safe. All the planes on the ground. The risky thing to do is to open an airport, and that is a difficult decision to make. They needed to do that as quickly and as soon as possible. In order to be able to make that decision in a cool-headed way, you needed a night's sleep.
There is a logic to that. Not sure many of our listeners will agree with it, but I see where you're coming from. Right, final fun question. Georgia in Hartford. Donald Trump is furious about a portrait of him painted by a British woman, which he's called truly the worst. What's the worst thing you've ever drawn or made? Stella Creasy.
Anything I attempt to try and get my kids to eat is usually the worst thing I've ever made.
Because you've cooked
I've got no cooking skills whatsoever. I burn rice cakes. I like the crispy cakes. I can't make them work. It's just a non-starter. Feel sorry for them. They have to put up with it.
Okay, Graham?
Well, I have no artistic skills of any sort whatsoever, despite the fact they tell you everybody does. So I think a wonky pot I made, it's as absolutely misshapen and useless as the policies of Donald Trump and Keir Starmer.
Natasha?
I also made a wonky pot at a hen do. You know, hen-dos these days, they like to put all of these women together. No. They like to put all us women together, and we all, do some kind of activity, and it was like some sort of jewellery pot making, but it looked so atrocious.
It's a change from a stripper, I suppose.
Theo?
I used to do a lot of meetings with Gordon Brown, and at first I was completely alert in those meetings, and after a while I'd done so many that I felt I had this habit of doodling in order to sort of keep myself awake, keep focused, attention. And it was only when Gordon said, "What's that?" that I'd realised I'd been drawing a picture of Gordon on the piece of paper and had to turn around to show him. So
was it
that
good?
was the most embarrassing.
Was it a good picture? Or?
It could have been worse.
It wasn't a good picture. It was good enough to be recognisable as a picture.
Did he keep it?
No.
Did you keep it?
No.
Is it on the wall in Downing Street?
It should
No.
be.
How long was it before you finished working for him after that?
That went on for quite a long time. There was still quite a lot
I'm glad to hear it.
Was he angry about it?
He was no more angry than usual.
Yes.
No mobile phones were thrown. Thank you all very much indeed. Now, tomorrow's panel consists of Conservative Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister Wendy Morton, Labour backbencher and former Corbyn Shadow Cabinet Minister or Member Richard Bergen, former Scottish Labour Party leader Kezia Dugdale, and the political strategist Joe Tanner. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of what we do about trying to educate boys about the ways of the world, because clearly something is failing in our society at the moment. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has rejected the idea of creating a minister for men to combat some of the issues raised in the Netflix drama Adolescence, which we've been talking about. He said he was worried about the crisis in masculinity raised in the programme, which centres on a 13-year-old boy arrested for the murder of a young girl and the rise of incel culture. Well, is he right to resist the pressure for a minister for men? Because this has been an argument that's been going on for a few years. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the chair of the Transport Select Committee has told LBC Heathrow's chief executive will face questions from MPs next